When hardened criminals repeatedly evade justice, elite police units are created to crack these toughest cases.
Police officers!
My role is investigating serious and organised crime.
We are a covert investigative team.
For the first time across the UK, we have exclusive access to the investigations of Britain's most talented detectives.
We'll spend years putting together all of these tiny pieces of evidence.
The most bizarre investigation I've been involved in.
And share, for the first time, the methods and evidence that bring these criminals to book.
Handguns coming in from the United States.
He had the drugs. That is a lot of money.
A real who did it.
This time, a dangerous gang dealing drugs in Gloucestershire.
You don't want to show your hand too early because the criminals will simply change up their routine and you're almost back to the beginning again.
An armed street robbery in sleepy Kent.
For them, it's a 2-minute, 5-minute bit of work to get whatever they want to get out of it, but they can leave a lifetime of issues behind.
And an organised posse stealing the UK's priceless history.
We don't call burglars nighthawks, we call them thieves.
Been in the police now for 24 years. Gloucestershire is a lovely place to live, lovely place to bring up your families. But from a policing point of view, like everywhere, there's always an underbelly to every idyllic town. There's been a rise in gang criminality and that sort of mentality of people wanting to force their will on others.
In December 2017, police in Gloucester received reports of a spate of violence linked to one gang.
We had a series of violent assaults, ended up in an attempt murder.
This dangerous gang had a hold on drug dealing in the city.
They were based out of Gloucester, but they were dealing drugs to people as far afield as Stroud and Cheltenham. They had quite a wide connection of customers.
Given the scale of the network and the extreme violence involved, a specialist team were created to bring the gang and its suspected leader, Andrew Venner, to justice.
I'm the senior investigating officer for that unit. Matt's responsibility as my deputy is to understand the intricate detail of the investigation. He's incredibly meticulous.
I oversaw the team of detectives who would look at all the information coming in and assess all the evidence we were collecting, whether that was from surveillance or the telecoms information we were able to get.
Dan is our lead investigator. He's the person that actually goes out and collates all the statements and all the evidence that we need.
The thing is, I don't stop. My inspector, Matt Phillips, sometimes has to say enough is enough now, and we have to draw a line on it.
Operation Solero was established in May 2018 to stop the cocaine-dealing gang.
We do a thing called lifestyling to start with, and that's purely just to understand what time do they get up in the morning, what time do they go to bed at night.
We began to build a chart of who was associating with who, the locations they'd frequent, and simple things just like which cars they were using so we could understand their movements. We can't just deploy surveillance willy-nilly on everyone. There has to be a compelling case of intelligence and information so we can get the relevant authorities to go out and conduct surveillance.
By June 2018, 4 weeks later, they had identified that Andrew Venner had a number two, who he trusted to run the illegal enterprise.
Andrew Venner wouldn't be hands-on. He's not going to go collect the drugs. He's not going to be handing them out to the drug dealers.
His number two, Matthew Cornwall, was our main focus.
He had two careers effectively. He worked as a personal trainer and he was a volunteer as a DJ on a local radio station.
He was the person going to meet all of the lower level suppliers. He was going to lead us to the other people that were involved.
Surveillance started to follow Matthew Cornwall.
He was linked to an address in an area called Willowlees.
We thought this was probably a place where he was storing his drugs.
He would frequently attend there and then go on and have short meetings in his vehicle where he would meet in a lay-by or a pub car park. Someone would jump in his car just for a matter of seconds and then be gone. And they had all the hallmarks of a drug deal. What we felt this group were doing, rather than selling to end users, they would split a kilogram block down into 9 ounces or quarter kilogram and then sell them on to further dealers. Crucially to an investigation like this is understanding the mobile telephones they use and who they communicate with on a frequent basis.
Most of the people that were involved in this had BQ Aquarius phones.
These phones were highly encrypted and hugely expensive, which gave fresh clues about the significant scale of the cocaine dealing.
EncroChat was a piece of software that was placed on these phones. You could only communicate with people that allowed access, so that they had this very secure network of encrypted communication. Your bog standard drug dealer doesn't have these phones. There's only one reason why you'd have one of these phones, is because you're at a particular level where your profit margin is such that you can afford to have one of these phones.
Whilst these encrypted phones were being used by the gang, police remained one step behind. Until they could understand how the gang were communicating, continuing surveillance was their only real option, and the police still didn't know where the gang's cocaine supply came from. Until a key breakthrough, 8 weeks into the investigation.
Matthew Cornwall met with a vehicle. Interestingly, on this occasion, he went into the vehicle with a bag and came out without a bag, effectively empty-handed. That made it look to us that potentially he was paying that person money as opposed to giving them drugs, or they were taking drugs from him. Once we started to research that vehicle, we understood that it had simply travelled from London that day for a couple of minutes and then made the return trip back to London.
We start realising then that this is likely to be our courier vehicle. That really opened up the investigation for us.
Now I had a car, now I had a face, and I would be able to do so much with that.
The team were now confident that the drugs started in London. But police had no idea who the courier was and didn't know who he worked for. DI Matt Phillips accessed the National Automatic Number Plate Recognition Network, known as ANPR. These cameras placed on roads across the country record every number plate that passes by.
We began to look at the automatic number plate recognition system to understand where in the country the vehicle travelled.
He was using a Citroen D3 or something, a very nondescript car, a little family car. No one's ever going to really think anything of that.
And we could see it really travelled across the whole of the southwest on a daily basis. It had all the hallmarks of a classic courier vehicle.
We were also able to go back historically to understand how many times he'd been before and what his routines were when he came into Gloucester.
Eventually, he was identified as Granit Nanushi, an Albanian male living in London.
But the police hadn't identified the man behind this courier, the Mr. Big supplying the Vena gang. And they still didn't have the evidence to link gang boss Vena to any of the cocaine.
You don't want to show your hand too early because the criminals will simply change up their routine and you're almost back to the beginning again. If we arrest Matthew Cornwall, someone like Andrew Vena will just find somebody else the next day and the problem will keep going. It became apparent Andrew Vena no longer had access to his encrypted phone. He had to resort back to a normal, what we would call a burner phone, a cheap phone that you can use for a few days or weeks and then throw away.
This was a major opportunity for police to link Vena. In October 2018, 4 months into the surveillance operation, there was a second significant event.
We were able to capture text messages to Andrew Vena after we seized the phones, talking about delivering paint and needing paint pots. In my mind, it's all code. It was quite amusing, really, because the two of them were seen on surveillance handing over paint pots at a petrol station to try to avoid being caught.
It was the first time the police surveillance operation had caught Andrew Vena handling what they suspected were drugs.
The decision above me had been made that we had to move to an arrest phase. It was time that we actually started to take some people out, arresting them and hopefully seizing drugs.
At the end of October, and with Vena at last implicated in the crime, police moved to try and build their evidence base by arresting street dealers in the act.
The next time that we saw Mr. Cornwall supplying a lower level drug dealer, we were going to take action.
Within a couple of days, 2 opportunities presented themselves. The subject went and met a customer. We knew who those customers were because we'd identified them already as part of the operation. We could be fairly happy that there would be a drugs exchange. Ian Fletcher made the decision to have the cars stopped if they were in a car or the person stopped if they were on foot. On the first occasion, it was a gentleman who lived in Stonehouse, and he'd met Matthew Cornwall over in Gloucester and was travelling back in his vehicle when officers stopped that car, and he was found in possession of a quarter-of-a-kilo of cocaine.
We were starting to gather evidence by arresting people that were being supplied so that we could say to the court that we saw a meeting between these two men, and after that we went to stop the person who bought the drugs, and lo and behold, they had drugs on them. We were asking the court to infer that all the other times when we didn't take drugs out, the exact same thing was happening. The pattern is the same. It's so important, the pattern.
We identified that person that was operating more within the actual city centre, more on foot.
The surveillance team were deployed, and we knew that he'd met with a male, and we had the arrest team ahead and waiting. It's a really delicate and really difficult situation because you don't want to make too much noise.
We work really strongly with our tactical operations team. They're overt police officers. They can, if needs be, enforce a stop on a vehicle, so do it very dynamically so people don't have the time to discard drugs or throw their phones away.
After 5 months of surveillance on the gang, police had enough evidence to arrest the leader, Andrew Venner, and his number 2, Matthew Cornwall. Their ambitious plan was to arrest them both and bring everything to an end in one swoop. Operation Solero targeted the next cocaine drop by their London-based supplier.
We saw what appeared to be an exchange take place between the two of them, and we saw Matthew Cornwall walking back towards the Willerleys flat with bags in his hand. And that's the time when I made a decision that we were going to strike. He goes round into like an outhouse shed area in that address, and very shortly after, a number of police officers come running in and arrest him in possession of what appeared at that time to be a large quantity of cocaine.
But there was a problem. While Matthew Cornwall was caught with the drugs, Andrew Venner was with friends and family nearly 60 miles away.
Immediately, our attention switched to Mr. Venner, who was actually in a restaurant in Cardiff. And so at that point, we knew it was important to get him into custody at the same time before he became aware of the arrests back in Gloucestershire.
In the restaurant, we used the CCTV to actually show when he was using the telephone. Something had happened to his encrypted device, so he started to use a standard Nokia phone. We could say, without doubt, those calls were being made to speak to the person who was controlling and supplying the drugs from London.
So when officers went to identify themselves to Mr. Venner so that they could arrest him, he tried to run away to start with. He ran through a car park and threw a number of mobile phones on the floor, but fortunately the officers were able to catch him and seize the mobile phones, which later gave us a bit of an answer to one of the pieces of the puzzle.
Analysis of Venner's phone provided the biggest breakthrough yet. The identity of the Mr. Big in London supplying the cocaine.
Initially, I called him London A because I didn't have a name, but I had a phone number for him. And that was the number that he was speaking to Andrew Venner on. He used that phone to call the council that he was living in. I identified Eris Hottie.
Eris Hottie was the head of the London cocaine suppliers.
He was communicating with an encrypted device that was a match to the other devices. There was an information marker so that if he tried to leave the country, we would know and then we'd be able to arrest him.
After a 6-month investigation, police had enough evidence to take down both Venner's gang and the London connection who supplied them cocaine. They waited for Eris Hottie to make a move.
It was, I think, maybe about 10:30 at night on a Sunday. Got a phone call. It's Luton Police here, and we've got your man. He had 10 grand stuffed in his shoes, really expensive sunglasses, and all like designer gear and everything. I went with the search officers to London, so didn't sleep that night. I came back with all the evidence from the house. I didn't sleep that day. I prepared my interview, didn't sleep then. Went and interviewed him, buzzing the whole time through.
Operation Solero seized 2 kilograms of cocaine, but they had evidence of a further 24 kilograms of cocaine, with an estimated value of £1 million. They also found £100,000 in cash. Andrew Venner was sentenced to 12 years and 9 months in prison. Matthew Cornwall was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The Albanian courier, Granit Nanushi, was sentenced to 8 years in prison, and his boss, the real Mr. Big, Eris Hottie, was arrested at Luton Airport and sentenced to over 8 years in prison.
I worked so hard to get this guy, and to have him there in front of me was just brilliant. And the work that I put in on that meant that he pleaded guilty in interview. He actually gave me a prepared statement where he said, yes, it was me.
Robbery with threats of force or violence is considered extremely serious. It carries a maximum penalty of life imprisonment. Rising rates of street robbery have become such a concern. The government has injected almost £20 million into tackling this specific problem. In England and Wales during 2021, on average there were 42 incidents every day of a knife or sharp instrument being used in a robbery.
Kent's generally a nice place to live and work. I've lived here all my life. We have a border with the Metropolitan Police and other forces and the coastline, so there are challenges within Kent Police.
Kent is an old county with over 18,000 listed buildings. But in 2021, this picturesque region has youth unemployment higher than the national average, and drug abuse is an ongoing problem.
The criminals have a range of motives. At the core of that sometimes is substance misuse, drug taking. They obviously can't fund that habit legally and so they choose to commit crime. Other times it's because they want to make money and they're not interested in going to work to do that.
February 2021. Reports of an armed robbery on the High Street of Lydd came into the Chief Constable's crime squad. It was a shocking incident in a normally quiet town.
Lydd's quite a small community. To be threatened as a member of the public during the day in the street is a rare event. For this suspect to use the threat of any weapon, it shows the level he's prepared to go to. So when it happens, it's obviously quite grave, quite serious, quite impactful on the victim.
Putting a specialist team onto the crime quickly was a top priority.
Sophie and Scott were selected to investigate this case. They've got the skills and the ability and the tenacity to identify who the suspect may be. Sophie West has been with the team since its inception. She's a really solid investigator, very intelligent.
I'm very nosy. I like investigating things and getting to the bottom and finding out what's happened. Seeing cases on the TV always fascinated me, and I enjoyed watching crime documentaries, which sounds quite geeky growing up, but no, it all inspired me to be a detective.
Scott came from an intelligence background, but he's able to adapt that to evidence and investigations.
I got into policing at the age of 22. I'd wanted to do for a few years, something that had really interested me. So I wanted to go and have a try, and yeah, a good few years later I'm still here, so I must have made the right decision.
Sophie and Scott work really well together. They're both very tenacious and they also look a little bit further and a little bit deeper to identify lines of inquiry and evidence that others might not spot.
The operation was up and running, and the crime-fighting duo needed to talk with the victim, a lone female.
With investigations like this, it's a worry that the offender can commit another offence before you can get hold of them.
We needed to go down to Lydd. We needed to visit the victim, to introduce ourselves as the investigating officers.
And got a detailed account from her as to where she'd been and what had happened and where the offender had gone. She was clearly very, very upset, very emotional. And I don't necessarily think it enters the thought process of the offenders. For them, it's a 2-minute, 5-minute bit of work to get whatever they want to get out of it, but they can leave a lifetime of issues behind.
It was a Sunday afternoon. This lady was walking along, taking some money to a friend who unfortunately couldn't leave their house. She heard somebody say, "Excuse me." She stopped and she turned around. The man said to her, "Do you have some coins? I'm homeless, I need some money."
And she produced £1 and gave him the £1.
He became threatening and quite aggressive towards her.
He produced a small bladed article. He was jabbing this towards her and being more forceful in his tone.
She took the quite drastic decision to run out in the road in front of a passing car, which she flagged down. And at that point, the male, he ran across the road into the graveyard and they didn't see him again.
The willingness to use a sharp weapon meant the police were concerned that the offender's next crime could prove even more serious. The team needed to quickly gather evidence.
We decided that we would walk up and down the high street to look for any CCTV cameras which may have captured any images of the offence being committed.
From those CCTV bits and pieces, it was quite clear that the offender had seemingly come from the bottom end of the high street.
We collected an image of the suspect.
He had his hood up, it was really tight round his face, and he had a green sort of mask covering up the lower half, so you could only really see his eyes.
He was wearing sort of off-white coloured trainers. We were aware these were the items of clothing that we needed to be mindful of when we were searching.
You could make out it was a male, and you could make out he was tall and slim, but not much more than that.
By the end of the first day, police had exhausted all of their video footage, but had no positive ID for their suspect.
We'd got as far as we could with the CCTV, and we really didn't know who this chap was. I took the focus and tried to look at what else had gone on in Lydd beforehand to see if there was any similar types of crimes that had occurred before this offence. The only thing that happened around the time of the robbery was a domestic at an address down the end of Lydd High Street that we were interested in.
We established that a person had been staying at the house. He was the partner of one of the ladies who was living in the house, and he'd since left. His last name was Smith, and he was in his 20s.
This lateral thinking had led to the first breakthrough for Operation Fathom, a potential name. Day 2 of the fast-moving investigation now turned to a database search around the surname Smith.
We conducted an open source search on social media, and he had a profile on Facebook. There were some photographs on there. He resembled the person who we had identified in the CCTV.
Operation Fathom seemed to be progressing until further digging revealed a problem.
We searched James Smith on our police intelligence system, and we soon established that actually James Smith was an alias.
The armed robber's real identity remained a mystery, so they turned back to their strongest lead, the house in Lydd where Smith had stayed.
We had an address where we thought that our robber had come from, and we were more confident at this point. It was about then trying to get back down to Lydd to see if we could put some more meat on the bone. Could we get any more CCTV going back towards this specific address?
Day 3 of the investigation. With the clock ticking, Operation Fathom returned to Lydd.
The quality of the CCTV, it was good, but it wasn't good enough. We knew where the robbery had taken place. We knew the route where the suspect had run away after committing the robbery. We had to walk the route to identify any further CCTV cameras.
After trawling the high street, officers found themselves outside the house where the robber had been staying.
This address was just off the high street, so what else could we do to try and put him near that address?
We noticed that they had a Ring doorbell camera.
We asked if we could have a look through the footage and see if we could get an image of who this lad was.
They let us review their Ring doorbell footage. We were able to go back to the date of the incident. We saw that he left the house wearing the clothing that we'd seen in the CCTV. It's a lot clearer. Well, you could see his face, and it was easy to identify distinguishable features.
He fitted the size, the build, the height.
We quickly established that it was him. We were elated because we knew that we were one step closer to finding out who he was.
This was a major breakthrough. Now armed with the doorbell footage and even more CCTV from the high street, officers tried to piece together the moments that led up to the armed robbery.
There were some CCTV opportunities in back streets. He left the address walking down these back streets and he went back the same way. Although we couldn't see exactly where he went, he generally walked into the direction of the address that we were concentrating our efforts on at this point.
The case against the unknown suspect was building, and further digging at last revealed what they hoped was his real identity. But arresting him would not be easy.
We established that this alias name came back on a search for a person by the name of Christopher Banks. Christopher Banks has previously been convicted of robbery offences.
Didn't know where he was, didn't know where he would be. He could have been anywhere in the county, he could have been anywhere in the country, to be quite honest. Then did a little bit of phone work around Banks's phone, and his phone suggested that he was living in Chatham. He was then researching addresses and locations in that area through whatever means we can get hold of.
Finally, 8 days after the armed street robbery, the police were ready to arrest Christopher Banks.
We established the address of where he might be staying.
Which was a house of multiple occupancy.
And on the 22nd of February, in the early morning, we all travelled up to Chatham.
Knocked on the door, or covered the front, covered the back, make sure there could be no escape. One of the other residents has let us in, and we've gone up to his room.
He woke up and opened the door. Soon after that, he was under arrest.
He was transferred to a custody suite and was soon face to face with PC West and PC Drake.
Do you know what a robbery is?
Taking something that isn't yours without the intention of giving it back by using some method of violence.
Initially, Banks was quite confident, if I remember rightly.
From what you showed me, it is suspicious why someone's walking down the road with a hood up and their face covered. If I saw that, immediately raise alarm bells. Yeah.
What's he doing at this
He's
car?
probably having a rummage around that one too.
Out on the thief is how I would describe his behaviour.
You're asking me the questions, I'm going to ask you a question. DNA in the cars. Surely if he's rummaged into cars...
We're here today to talk about the robberies.
Is that you in the grey hoodie?
No, sir. He looks quite well built in that picture, if you don't mind me saying.
Is that you?
That's not me at all, sir, no.
He refused to accept any involvement in the robbery whatsoever.
Who's that male?
That male is me, sir, wearing my jacket that I've got on now in custody.
And what else?
A grey hoodie.
A grey hoodie.
Without intentionally landing myself in trouble here, I can see a resemblance between me and the person in that video.
Let's cut the rubbish. If that's not you, who is it?
He denied that this was him, despite the strong resemblance, and he suggested that it was somebody else who'd let themselves into the house as and when they please.
I don't think he told the truth all the way through the interview.
Listen, no, all right, I've got to say my own back, yeah? He's a weed dealer.
He's a weed dealer?
Yeah.
When somebody denies it, it's not a massive issue. If you know your case as well as we knew this one, we didn't need a confession. The evidence was there, it was him. So if he wants to sit and lie to us for an hour, crack on and lie.
Banks' refusal to confess meant the case against him had to be watertight. The team waited on the results of the ID parade, which was now crucial.
The ID parade was carried out, and one of my colleagues in the ID team called me up soon after, and he said, "It's a positive identification."
Christopher Banks was charged with robbery, possession of a bladed article, and possession of cannabis. At court, he finally confessed by pleading guilty. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison and a further 4 years on licence after his release.
To get the outcome was brilliant, and the victim was absolutely over the moon, which is, without sounding too silly, that it is why we do it. To hear her crying, good, happy tears was brilliant.
Recent government estimates suggest that over 838,000 people take part in metal detecting. It's a popular hobby. But not all of these detectorists are doing it legitimately. Historic England estimates that nearly 1 in 5 of the country's treasured listed buildings have been targeted by criminals. And metal detecting is one of the favoured tactics.
So I've been in the police for almost 2 decades. You kind of get used to your bread and butter policing, although it's always kind of evolving.
In 2020, across Europe, over 94,000 artefacts from illicit excavations were seized. In Cheshire, police decided to play their part in stopping this type of crime.
So in 2019, we started the rural crime team that was dedicated to look after rural crime, wildlife crime, heritage crime, and waste crime. Let's get confidence back in rural policing. Let's get people reporting it, feeling like their concerns are going to be taken seriously.
In December 2019, Cheshire's Rural Crime Unit received reports of strange activity at a remote local castle.
One of our fantastic sites, Beeston Castle, was being targeted by night hawkers. Night hawkers is this unusual name for those that take out their metal detectors, go out under the cover of darkness and dig up historic artefacts with no permissions in place.
The remains of 800-year-old Beeston Castle are perched high on a crag above Cheshire Plain. It's extremely isolated and typical of the historic sites across the country that have previously yielded thousands of pounds of irreplaceable treasure.
Where do we even start with this? It's a huge area, it being in a rural location. You haven't got like the CCTV, you haven't got all the other bits that you'd normally get in an urban area.
Sergeant Simpson assigned a crack team to tackle this very unique crime.
My job as a supervisor is really easy when I've got a really enthusiastic team. They do all the hard work in that sense. PC Tether is committed to getting the right result. So he was first choice to get stuck in.
Just being out there and trying to help the rural communities. So I want to follow up that passion really, policing the rural area. Being brought up around in the countryside, in the back and beyond, I've always had appreciation for the countryside.
It's a partnership thing when it comes to policing our heritage. We need experts. You know, the police, we do not know everything. We need all the help we can get. So we go to our partners like Historic England and Mark Harrison.
I'm the head of Heritage Crime Strategy for Historic England. My role came about as a result of a report into illicit metal detecting. We've now got the capacity, the capability and the skills to investigate and to bring those people to justice.
The team's first task was to understand what the thieves had done.
We've had training with identifying the work of metal detectorists. It was about 40, 50 holes dug. They were clear spade marks, metal discarded, left by the holes. It was a mess.
We don't call burglars night hawks, we call them thieves, and that's what these people are.
And then we had another report a couple of weeks afterwards of more damage to the site. 75 to 80 holes have been found within the grounds of the castle.
And this was a real key bit for us, this pattern of crime sort of occurring at the castle, because we didn't really have very much to go on at that point.
Police had no idea precisely what had been taken, and identifying the criminals was impossible without CCTV or witnesses. The team had to wait for the thieves' next move and hope they could respond quick enough.
The real concern was, during that time, what could they do with it? They could sell the articles. There was a lucrative black market. We wanted to be that team that recovered stolen treasure from a castle and returned it to them. And we had this phenomenal break. It was the day prior to New Year's Eve. Someone was trying to sell some of the artefacts that we believed had been taken from Beeston Castle.
The artefacts included a valuable Bronze Age axe head, the first clue that the stolen goods could have significant financial worth. All holiday festivities were quickly cancelled.
There lies a challenge. It couldn't be a worst case scenario in terms of timings for us. We've all got family plans, and yet we had this information that we couldn't just sit on. As soon as the shops reopened again, there was a chance that these items would be lost. We started to get this warrant sorted. Now, we had to go to an out-of-hours magistrate to be able to get that sworn out. Then it was about trying to make sure we got the right people in place to put a door through, the right arrest teams, interview teams, and so on. And that can be a real logistical nightmare.
The two suspects lived on the edge of Manchester.
This would be great, thank you. OK, right, you're going to have to be handcuffed.
Yeah, mate, no, it's fine,
That's fine.
We searched the address and we found metal detecting equipment. A lot of it was items that weren't of any interest or historical value.
That's fine, and we'll be good with them.
Everything rested on finding something at the home of the second suspect.
We turned up at the next address and he was quite happy to talk to us about the finds and in fact led us straight to where some of the items were, which were located under his bed.
But none of these items were from Beeston Castle, and police couldn't prove they were stolen.
So following the interviews then they were both sort of released under investigation.
The operation seized the suspects' phones. This is standard in most investigations, but what the police uncovered was startling.
I examined the phones and we've discovered photographs on there, pictures of Bronze Age axe heads. We also found a WhatsApp group.
And what there was on there was a discussion between a number of males talking about their involvement in this kind of activity, night hawking, and the locations they'd go to. And that was like a goldmine of information for us. It put many more suspects in the frame, and it really sort of cemented in just how involved the two suspects were.
The WhatsApp chat confirmed the gang's activity at Beeston Castle, but it also implicated them in another night hawking theft.
Also on there we had other heritage sites across England and Wales, a site called Roach Abbey in South Yorkshire, which is a monastery, again owned by English Heritage.
The case against the criminals was slowly building, but the investigation was about to take another turn.
So we had contact from a suspect solicitor who offered up the location of the Bronze Age axe head to us, wanted to hand them in.
Although the suspect had handed over the axe heads, police needed to link them to Beeston Castle, otherwise their case was still weak.
Effectively, we recovered some of the stolen items, but how do you put them to a certain location?
We'd done other types of forensic work before, but we'd never done soil analysis.
The axe heads were sent to a specialist lab in Swindon for soil analysis.
I'm a forensic ecologist, so I use different environmental traces to look at the relationship between potential exhibits and suspects. The Cheshire area is a sandstone area, but Beeston Castle itself sits on this promontory of very red, silty, sandy, local geology that's very specific to that area. We took the soils from Cheshire back. We knew that we were looking at a very specific sandy type. And then we looked at the Bronze Age axe heads. And what we wanted to demonstrate is that they hadn't come from somewhere else. My initial gut feeling was that actually, because of the sandy component, there wouldn't be that much adhesion of soils to the object. But actually that wasn't a problem because all of the sand had pushed its way through over time into the base of the object and sort of accumulated. So we had this really nice adhesion of material at the bottom of the axe head that we could look at. I was looking at the two soils and I was comparing them, and there was this moment where I thought, yes, these are the same soils. These Bronze Age axe heads have come from Beeston Castle. They are part of the archaeological landscape there.
With the axe heads directly linked to Beeston Castle, 3 months after the first reports came in, Operation Roundhouse was ready to arrest everyone in the gang's WhatsApp group.
We have now got this wonderful dilemma of obtaining 6 warrants, I think, in total, right across the sort of region in Manchester where the suspects lived. We use the same kind of techniques that we do to get into any property quickly. So we had the rip saws. We had them battering them off the hinges as well. People need to realise this kind of crime is serious, and we're not going to just go and knock on doors politely. We wanted to show just how seriously we took heritage crime. We did find coins, other artefacts that we could link back to Beeston Castle and perhaps some of the places like the one in South Yorkshire as well. Once we got all that together, it was then a chance for us to kind of regroup and get those exhibits back to one location. And when it started coming through the door and people were arriving back with bags of coins and bags of items, it was a phenomenal feeling.
There were over 50 items recovered by police. The axe heads alone can sell for hundreds of pounds, but their irreplaceable nature makes it impossible to calculate their true value. 5 men were arrested. At court, they all admitted the charge of theft by finding. The 5 men are now barred from going anywhere near historic sites in England and Wales for 5 years.
What we're talking about here is a group of people that have no association with the site at all. They don't own it, they don't manage it. So this was just pure criminal behaviour.